Welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined today by our producer, Thomas Dye. We're pleased today to have Phil Simpson with us again. Phil is the former CEO of Republic Gypsum Company. It's a business that helped define Lubbock's industrial growth in the second half of the 20th century. We had some really good stories from Phil about how the company was founded last week, and this week we're going to explore the company's growth, ultimately its sale, and finally its legacy within the Lubbock community. Phil, welcome back. Thank you again for taking time to share your story. You talked about in our last segment about how your father wanted a gypsum plant, and you became tasked with the responsibility of finding a location for that, finding the capital to complete the construction. You got it up, you got it out of the ground, got it running, developed some competitive advantages over your larger competitors in that you delivered in truckload quantities where they required customers to purchase in flat rail cars. Talk about how the company grew, who some of your key people were, and the growth trajectory that you experienced in the first couple of decades of operating Republic Gypsum.
Well, first thing we did is we hired a man that had many years' experience in the gypsum board business. He had actually physically himself had built several plants. His name was Wallace Riddell, and so he supervised the construction of our plant, which was very important and he was there at startup, and it made gypsum board like he had been making it in other plants for years before. And so then we hired good salesmen. We knew, since we've been in building material distribution, we knew good salesmen, named one Max Montgomery from Ardmore, and he was promoted through the years and actually even to high-ranking position in the company. And his name was Max Montgomery. And so we were in the middle of the post-war years, and the company grew very fast.
Talk a little bit about the volatility in the housing industry and commodity pricing and how that affected the company. I mean, there may not be a more volatile industry than the housing industry, and you had some real high peaks and some really tough challenges in those years.
Gypsum industry itself was originally known as an oligopoly, oligopoly, which was an industry dominated by a handful of companies, as opposed to a monopoly, which is a single company. And so an oligopoly, they able to work together for everyone's mutual benefit. It's not really illegal to run an oligopoly, but it was run for the benefit of the members of the oligopoly. So that's what the industry we ran into. And so we were not members of the oligopoly, but we were sideline people.
You were upstarts.
And so one time they wanted to buy our company, and we gave some thought to that, but it never panned out at that time for us to sell the gypsum company.
You also, at one point, I believe the company changed its name from Republic Gypsum to Republic Housing, and you
Yes.
were, I believe you acquired a asphalt roofing company and also perhaps built some mobile homes in an attempt to diversify. How did that work out?
Did not work out well. The ways of business, mobile homes, and asphalt roofing are completely different from gypsum. Asphalt roofing is dependent on oil price, so it has nothing to do with how efficient you are. It just the oil price is up and down, as we all know. And then the ready-built house business was a completely different method of operating than gypsum wallboard. Our ways of doing business work very well with gypsum wallboard, salesmen calling on lumber yards, etc. And uh, and that could have worked with just gypsum board itself, but once we tried to get over into these allied businesses of asphalt roofing and mobile homes, we ran into headwinds.
Yeah. I think you referenced in your book that sometimes it's better to stick with what you know, and ultimately you got out of the asphalt roofing business
Yeah, that's
and
right.
probably divested of the mobile home industry and refocused on just gypsum wallboard manufacturing.
That's
Um,
correct.
there were some times in the late '70s where business conditions were tough and your capital structure got challenging and your bank interest rates were in the high teens or low 20s. Talk about how you made your way through those times.
Well, banking is always very access to long-term credit, namely from banks, was always important to us, and so Lubbock always had a vital commercial banking industry, and so that relationship served us well. And
It's a good
we
time.
paid into our balance sheet, and so we were always able to pay our bills on time.
Well, you did a magnificent job of leading the company through some really difficult economic times.
That's
Um,
correct.
let's take a quick break. I want to remind our listeners that if you have a suggestion for a future guest on Archive West Texas, please email us. Our email address is info@classical1057.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're continuing our conversation today with Phil Simpson, former CEO of Republic Gypsum. Phil, we were talking in the last segment about some of the business challenges that you faced in the '70s, some of your expansion and diversification that might not have worked out as well as you had hoped, and then how you refocused the company on gypsum wallboard and the paperboard acquisitions. You built the company into a very strong success in the '80s. It was continuing to compound its earnings. I know you have many very happy stockholders from those initial investments back in the '60s. Yeah, you built the company into a, an ongoing concern and and a very rewarding and profitable endeavor for the Republic Gypsum team. Um, what do you think about when you look back on that ride?
Well, it was quite interesting. Our company was like a big family. I always enjoyed walking the plants and visiting with our employees, and did that for many years. So, one interesting story about the way the oligopolistic companies work. I remember one time, this was some in the early years, we would have empty trucks coming by Sweetwater where there were four gypsum plants. And so we stopped and said, could we have a could we get a load of gypsum on we want to haul it back to Lubbock, different Sweetwater? And the answer was, oh no, that would be unethical. I responded to them, well, wait a minute. I did study some philosophy at Rice University. What does ethics have to do with whether or not we buy gypsum board on a truck? Well, of course, I was running into the oligopolistic way. That was one of their ways of controlling prices, is selling to a select group of customers, those that had their own trucks and their own distribution facilities, and they didn't like cowboys in the industry who would buy a truckload of gypsum board and then offload it in a side lot.
Did not want their model to be potentially disrupted.
Yeah.
So, how did you ultimately come to the conclusion that it was best to sell the company? Most textbooks will say that's the most difficult decision for an entrepreneur to reach. What led you to decide that it was time to sell?
Two occasions, people came to us and wanted to buy the other gypsum companies. I mean, it was a good time to sell, but we didn't want to sell, didn't need to sell. But as time went on, I got wary. And then we had two prospective buyers at the same time wanted to buy the company. And so I got interested, and the family got interested. And so we hired a New York investment banker, J.P. Morgan, to help us sell the company. And they did a great job of it. It was what you call a control auction. I mean, it wasn't an auction per se, but it was one person talking to, say, the two or three who already expressed an interest, plus there was another 3 or 4 out there that could possibly be interested. And so that's the process that Morgan did, and they did an outstanding job of selling the gypsum division and the paper division.
After the sale, what did you diversify into business-wise?
We bought more timberland in East Texas, which was maybe not the best decision in the world, but that was where our roots were. Our family started in the timber business. And then we did have one very interesting investment, Legacy Foods, which made packaging out of paper products. But again, it was a company dominated by large companies who ran it for their own benefit and not for the benefit of everyone in the industry. And so that's when I retired.
Well, it's a remarkable story, a remarkable career building the gypsum plant and growing the company to a listing on the New York Stock Exchange, and then finding an effective and rewarding sale of the company to Syntex. We'll take a quick break here. We'll come back and conclude with Phil talking about wisdom that he's garnered through the years in the business world and reflections on the legacy that his family has here in Lubbock and West Texas. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Archive West Texas. We're wrapping up our conversation with Phil Simpson, former CEO and founder of Republic Gypsum Company. He's given our listeners a front row seat into the founding and the growth of the company. In our last segment, we talked about the sale of it. Let's talk a little bit, Phil, about the legacy of the company. How do you hope the people of Lubbock remember the work that you and your team did in this area?
Lubbock was always very important to us. The My father was very interested in the water situation, and in his later years, he wanted to import water from southern Canada into the South Plains. That was a very big idea, that much larger than our capabilities. So we did not pursue that. And then, uh, but
You had
I
some special banking relationships in the Lubbock area.
I remember one time in Lubbock, in our principal business was in Dallas area, and times were tough, and I needed a line of credit of 50 million, and so that was beyond the capability of who we were banking with there, and so they stood me up, and what they did first is they delegated me to incompetent younger bankers. I should have gotten a hint from that, but I didn't. And I had one of my vice presidents, I said, would you go to so and so, this banker, and tell me what you think about him? And he came back to me, he says, Phil, you don't have a banker. And so I just picked up the phone and I called Lubbock, a bank in Lubbock, Lubbock National, Wayne Fennell, and I told him what I needed, and the line of credit. He says, it's yours. We'll credit that sum of money into your account today. So that was the kind of relationship that I really liked. And I had that kind of relationships with the people in our factories, and who I knew many of them personally.
Now, your father had a similar banking story in his early days coming to Lubbock from Avenger, didn't he?
Yes, he did. When he came to Lubbock, this is in 1939, and we had a house on Dixie Drive, which is near 19th
19th
and
and Q. Yeah.
and let's see, I forgot.
Remember about Mr. Coulter and
Oh yeah,
tight credit and the mortgages.
we had in East Texas. My dad, he didn't have. There was no way to get money for long term, large amounts for long term. You just, if you bought a tract of land and you just gave him a note. So he had quite a few notes like that where he had bought quite a bit of land. He probably owned 6,000 or 7,000 acres, which he had bought in that way. And so the Depression came along and he had a general merchandise store. And this is probably part of the whole South of America. And so the poor people would buy groceries on the time pay plan from a local store. My father had a company. My great grandfather had a company called A.M. Ryan and Company, and so he had been, you might say, feeding the local people for some period of time by extending credit, selling them flour and seed, etc. So he got a little bit overextended, and so you might say he ran out of way to finance his business at that time, and there were no bank holding companies that we did business with, and so I went out to Lubbock, and I knew Lubbock was booming. The war had just ended. People were back from across the waters.
Speaking of your father,
Yes, and they were wanting a house to buy, and that's where my dad started building these small houses, ready-built houses, and selling building materials. We had a sawmill in Avenger. We would sell some of our own lumber. Then we'd buy lumber from other mills and sell it in truckload quantities. So that business prospered, and it was called Avenger Lumber Company. So that was really my first job. Was he called me up? I was going to get a PhD, and he said, "Phil, I need you." That was back in the days.
But
If your father wanted you to do something, you did it.
back to your father's dry goods store, his customers were having trouble paying in the Depression.
Yes.
His
And
capital
then,
got
and then
stressed
that's
similarly, and then I suppose he could have been having trouble paying his notes on all the timber acquisitions. So if I remember right, you mentioned that he came out to Lubbock, and there was a banker maybe perhaps in the Avenger area that was contemplating a foreclosure of some kind, and your father ran into some really good people in Lubbock that were able to help him. Do I have that right? Or
yes. The we so I go out to Lubbock
you're your dad.
with my father and one of our hands. And so we met the local banker in Lubbock at First National Bank, Mr. Posey and Mr. Riddle. And so I said, "No, we want to open a lumber yard across the street from the fairgrounds, and we need some money. So how much do you need?" I wouldn't declare myself because I was afraid whatever number I gave him, he'd turn me down. That was the way in East Texas. There was no, they weren't liberal with credit. And so anyway, so I go back the next day, and over a period of about 2 or 3 days, one of these bank officials who were the top executives of the bank, "Well, I know you're not saying how much you need, but I want to tell you, I think you're good for $20,000. And so I guess my father gulped and decided that he'd take it. So that was really more than he wanted to borrow, but he did borrow it, and then he paid it back quickly, and so that led over the years to he enjoyed credit at that bank of the bank's credit limits over a period of 2 decades.
it's a good story. Some good people in West Texas. What do you think your father would say if he could see the company that you built and how far you took that?
He'd be amazed, and I think he'd been delighted that I did sell it, because we sold for cash, and we never had a lot of cash before. And so we were able to diversify our investments, one of which was buying timberland. Not a good decision, but that's what we did do with it.
Phil, thank you for taking time to talk with us today. Your story is truly remarkable. Appreciate you sharing with our listeners how a Lubbock family built one of the largest and most successful gypsum plants in America. You're kind to have taken the time. David, thank you. I want to remind our listeners that we're here every Saturday and Sunday for you at Archive West Texas. Please join us again next week for our next episode. Thank you.